The majority of individuals are under the impression that they are making logical choices regarding their lives. They assume they assess possibilities, weigh consequences, and pick what resonates most positively. However, in actuality, virtually all decision-making is processed through a leading internal thought arrangement that functions beyond deliberate consciousness. This arrangement isn't simply a solitary thought or conviction. It's a cognitive structure that subtly regulates how prospects are viewed, how dangers are emotionally perceived, and which outcomes appear achievable or unachievable. It functions like unseen software operating discreetly, interpreting the world before rationale even comes into play. By the time someone believes they are deciding, the interpretation has already been formulated for them. This cognitive blueprint evolves into the habitual filter for reality. Upon hearing about investing, individuals don't just handle data. Their internal arrangement determines if investing seems hazardous or commonplace, if risk seems irresponsible or vital, if ambiguity feels like opportunity or peril. The same holds true for career paths, relationships, and self-improvement. Two individuals can receive identical advice, read the same book, or encounter the same circumstance, yet experience entirely diverse emotional reactions. These reactions don't stem from the details. They stem from the fundamental thought arrangement that determines what feels secure, what feels attainable, and what feels forbidden. This arrangement is seldom challenged because it seems innate. Individuals presume it is simply their inherent nature. They believe their anxieties are justifiable, their inclinations are sensible, and their constraints are realistic. However, these aren't unbiased truths. They are interpretations molded by years of conditioning. The mind isn't an impartial observer. It's a filter that decides which data receives emotional significance and which is disregarded. Eventually, this filter becomes so recognizable that it feels like identity. Individuals don't express, "I am operating under a cognitive structure shaped by early experiences." They express, "This is just who I am." The shaping of this arrangement commences early in life. Childhood occurrences, familial mindsets, educational frameworks, and cultural standards all play a role in how someone learns to decipher the world. A child raised in an atmosphere where money is discussed with unease learns that financial choices should prioritize safety and preventing loss. A student solely rewarded for obedience and rote learning learns that achievement stems from adhering to regulations rather than experimenting. A household where failure is punished emotionally teaches the brain to link errors with peril rather than learning. None of these lessons are explicitly taught. They are absorbed through repeated emotional experiences. Educational frameworks have a particularly influential role. Most frameworks are intended to reward conformity, predictability, and linear advancement. Students are trained to optimize for grades, approval, and predetermined routes. They're rarely taught how to think regarding strategy, leverage, or long-term optionality. Consequently, individuals graduate with robust technical understanding but weak decision frameworks. They understand how to execute tasks, but not how to design their own trajectory. Their cognitive arrangement becomes reactive rather than proactive. Instead of inquiring what kind of life they desire to construct, they inquire what options are on hand and pick the least unpleasant one. Familial convictions additionally reinforce this. Money is seldom discussed analytically. It's discussed emotionally. Parents pass down not just habits, but also anxieties, suppositions, and limitations. If a family believes that prosperity is reserved for select individuals, the child internalizes a feeling of separation from opportunity. If a family believes that stability is more crucial than growth, the child learns to prioritize certainty over potential. These convictions become emotional reflexes. Even when one intellectually grasps that different strategies are present, their nervous system still reacts according to the established arrangement. Over time, this results in a distinctive manner of thinking. Most individuals become passive interpreters of their surroundings. They react to situations rather than shaping them. They await external validation before acting. They optimize for short-term ease instead of long-term benefit. This isn't because they are indolent or unintelligent. It's because their cognitive blueprint was trained to circumvent ambiguity, minimize perceived risk, and remain within familiar limits. Strategic thinking feels unnatural to a mind conditioned for safety. A straightforward scenario illustrates this clearly. Picture two individuals with matching age, education, income, and access to data. On paper, their potential is identical, but their thought arrangements are distinct. One person interprets financial choices through the lens of security. They focus on preserving their assets, circumventing errors, and sustaining stability. When presented with a fresh prospect, their initial inquiry is, what if this goes awry? The other person interprets the same choices through the lens of learning and leverage. They focus on skill enhancement, long-term upside, and experimentation. Their initial inquiry is, what can this teach me, even if it doesn't work out? Over a decade, the outcomes diverge significantly. The first person opts for stable positions, circumvents ambiguity, and prioritizes predictability. Their income grows gradually, their skill set remains limited, and their sense of control feels robust but delicate. The second person explores varied paths, accepts temporary instability, and accumulates diverse experiences. Some endeavors fail, some succeed, but overall their optionality grows. They gain broader skills, wider networks, and more leverage over time. The difference isn't effort, it's interpretation. The identical external reality produced two completely dissimilar internal responses. These interpretations are reinforced by cognitive biases ingrained in human psychology. Loss aversion causes potential detriments to register as more emotionally impactful than comparable gains. Status quo bias makes present conditions appear safer than alteration, even when alteration is objectively advantageous. Confirmation bias prompts individuals to seek out details that bolster their current convictions and disregard details that challenge them. Collectively, these biases secure the cognitive configuration in position. Once an individual believes a particular mode of existence is accurate, their mind vigorously filters reality to safeguard that belief. This explains why individuals frequently respond emotionally to novel concepts rather than analytically. When a notion poses a threat to the prevailing cognitive blueprint, it feels uneasy, even perilous. The unease is not about rationale. It pertains to identity. Embracing a fresh structure would necessitate conceding that prior judgments were predicated on deficient assumptions. The mind opposes this because it destabilizes the perception of self. It is simpler to dismiss fresh blueprints than to reconstruct one's internal operating system. Contemporary settings exacerbate this even further. Social media platforms incentivize short-lived engagement, emotional responses, and external affirmation. Advertising persistently links contentment with consumption and instant gratification. Corporate frameworks frequently incentivize adherence more than autonomous thought. All of these systems strengthen a cognitive configuration fixated on momentary ease, visibility, and emotional safeguarding. They condition the mind to pursue rapid incentives and evade long-term ambiguity. Eventually, this refashions how individuals undergo motivation itself. Progress registers as precarious, stability registers as accountable, ease registers as warranted. This cultivates a potent reciprocal arrangement. The more an individual pursues ease, the more their mind links safeguarding with recognizable configurations. The more recognizable those configurations become, the more uneasy anything outside them registers. Ultimately, the cognitive blueprint turns self-guarding. It no longer assesses prospects objectively. It filters them grounded in emotional congruence with the prevailing identity. Individuals do not inquire, is this strategically optimal? They inquire, does this register as something someone like me would do? At this juncture, the majority of individuals believe they are selecting their trajectory. In actuality, they are executing a script composed by years of conditioning. Their judgments register as personal, but the rationale underpinning them is inherited. Their preferences register as authentic, but the emotional reactions propelling them were molded long before they were cognizant of alternatives. They are not mindfully architecting their existence strategy. They are running default configurations. The paramount realization in this initial segment is that the preponderance of human conduct is governed by an internal operating system that was never purposefully designated. It was installed via environment, education, and emotional reinforcement. This system dictates what registers as realistic, what registers as irresponsible, what registers as plausible, and what registers as off-limits. Until this configuration is recognized, it cannot be altered. And for as long as it lingers imperceptible, it subtly delineates the ceiling of what an individual believes their existence can evolve into. Prior to advancing, the crucial point is not to adjudicate this configuration as favorable or unfavorable, but to acknowledge its presence. The majority of individuals do not falter because they lack discipline or intellect. They falter because their cognitive framework was never designated for strategic progress. It was designated for emotional safeguarding in a realm that no longer incentivizes it. Once this dominant thought configuration is established, it does not remain abstract or philosophical. It manifests itself in very tangible financial conduct. The manner in which an individual contemplates dictates how they emotionally relate to money itself. For some, money is undergone as a defensive resource, something to be guarded, accumulated, and consumed meticulously to sustain emotional safeguarding. For others, money is undergone as a tool, something to be deployed strategically to cultivate leverage, autonomy, and optionality. These two interpretations yield completely disparate financial existences, even when income tiers are comparable. An individual with a security-oriented cognitive blueprint tends to perceive money as breakable. The principal objective turns preservation. Spending judgments are propelled by dread of detriment and yearning for ease. Investments register as stressful because they introduce ambiguity. Even prospects with positive anticipated outcomes register as perilous because they disrupt the perception of command. This individual may accumulate diligently, evade debt, and prioritize predictability, yet remain financially stagnant for decades. Their conduct registers as accountable, but it is optimized for emotional safeguarding rather than long-term advantage. By contrast, an individual with a leverage-oriented cognitive blueprint undergoes money as pliable. The objective is not merely to safeguard it, but to employ it to reshape future conditions. This individual is willing to allocate resources toward learning, experimentation, and systems that scale. They comprehend that money sitting fixed slowly forfeits power via inflation and opportunity cost. Instead of inquiring how to evade detriment, they inquire how to augment future options. The identical dollar signifies something completely disparate contingent on the cognitive framework interpreting it. This identical configuration extends straightforwardly into career judgments. A scarcity-oriented mindset pursues stability above all else. It prioritizes fixed remunerations, predictable functions, and linear advancement. The central inquiry becomes, how do I secure my position, rather than how do I expand my capabilities? Career shifts are evaluated grounded in short-term peril rather than long-term upside. Individuals remain in functions that register as secure even when progress potential is constrained. Eventually, this yields a narrow skill assortment and a strong dependence on external structures for income. A growth-oriented mindset approaches careers distinctively. It fixates on skill accumulation, adaptability, and ownership. Instead of prioritizing immediate earnings, it prioritizes future influence. This individual might accept reduced short-term steadiness in return for gaining valuable skills, developing networks, or gaining ownership. They consider things in terms of accumulation. Each position is assessed not just by the salary, but by the expertise gained and subsequent opportunities. Earnings become a consequence of strategic placement, rather than the main objective. These two methods frequently appear comparable in their early stages. Both individuals may begin with entry-level roles, similar compensation, and similar duties. The divergence arises progressively. The scarcity-focused individual remains close to what seems comfortable. The growth-focused individual advances toward what seems tactically advantageous, even if it is uneasy. After a decade or more, the distinction becomes foundational. One individual relies on a solitary income source. The other possesses numerous options, varied proficiencies, and negotiating strength. Risk assessment is crucial in this split. The majority are taught to dread apparent dangers. Launching an enterprise feels hazardous. Investing feels hazardous. Changing careers feels hazardous. These actions entail doubt, societal assessment, and the chance of short-term loss. The emotional mind reacts intensely to these hazards due to their palpability and immediacy. However, hidden dangers are seldom perceived with similar strength. Inflation eroding buying power, skills becoming outdated, and lasting reliance on one employer feel conceptual and far off. This leads to a perilous disparity. People exaggerate risks that are easily visualized and underestimate risks that develop gradually. A person might avoid investing due to fear of losing funds, yet dismiss the certainty that funds will depreciate over time. They might avoid gaining new skills because it feels unpleasant, yet dismiss the likelihood that their current position will undergo automation or outsourcing. The emotional mechanism is geared for immediate survival, not lasting enhancement. The prevailing mindset dictates which dangers seem substantial and which seem insignificant. A security-centered model amplifies apparent threats and suppresses concealed ones. A growth-centered model does the opposite. It embraces short-term instability in return for lasting adaptability. This is not about being foolhardy. It is about aligning emotional reactions with tangible reality rather than instant ease. Organizations greatly profit from consistent conduct. Educational institutions, firms, and monetary systems are structured around uniform routes. They reward obedience, specialization, and steadiness. These systems operate optimally when individuals adhere to established guidelines, embrace linear advancement, and refrain from questioning the structure itself. From the organization's viewpoint, this is effective. It cultivates dependable employees, controllable risk, and predictable output. However, this predictability is detrimental to the individual. As individuals assimilate institutional rationale, they start gauging success using metrics established by the system. Promotions, designations, and compensation become replacements for advancement. They seldom assess whether these indicators align with individual influence, independence, or lasting security. The system rewards those who integrate smoothly, not those who seek to reshape their role. With time, this fosters a subtle reliance. Individuals grow emotionally connected to arrangements that feel secure. They mistake institutional approval for individual progress. They shun strategies that deviate from conventional models, even when those strategies yield superior lasting results. The mental pattern adapts to the setting. Rather than inquiring how to enhance their own path, they inquire how to perform better within current limitations. This pattern becomes self-perpetuating via social and informational feedback mechanisms. Individuals naturally gravitate toward others who share their perspective. An individual who values stability most highly will surround themselves with individuals who prioritize the same. Discussions, media consumption, and guidance all reinforce the current mental model. Conflicting viewpoints seem unrealistic or irresponsible. Evidence supporting the existing belief system is amplified. Evidence challenging it is disregarded. This selective interpretation fosters the semblance of objectivity. Individuals believe they are making sound decisions based on facts, when they are actually filtering facts through emotional compatibility. The mind safeguards the existing identity by building a cohesive narrative. Failures are ascribed to external aspects. Successes that defy the model are deemed exceptions or luck. Gradually, the belief system becomes internally consistent and externally shielded. At this point, financial results seem dictated by exertion, intellect, or circumstance. However, these are superficial variables. Beneath them lies the mental structure that molds how exertion is channeled, how intellect is applied, and how circumstances are understood. Two individuals can exert equal effort, yet attain vastly different results because their internal models guide them toward different kinds of actions. The central insight of this segment is that financial routes are not mainly propelled by motivation or discipline. They are propelled by understanding. The prevailing mindset dictates what choices seem accessible, what dangers seem acceptable, and what strategies seem legitimate. It defines the unseen limits within which an individual functions. Until those limits are examined, all enhancement occurs inside a predetermined framework. This explains why guidance often fails. Instructing someone to invest, take chances, or consider the long term is ineffective if their emotional system is calibrated for safety and predictability. The guidance clashes with their internal operating mechanism. It seems amiss even when it's accurate. Absent addressing the foundational cognitive architecture, alterations in conduct are shallow and fleeting. Upon concluding this phase, it's evident that the genuine impediment isn't external. It's not a shortage of data, prospects, or provisions. It's the inherent structure that interprets reality and affixes emotive significance to choices. As long as that structure is unscrutinized, monetary conduct will persist in alignment with prior patterns, irrespective of fresh insight. This concludes Part 2, highlighting that the constraint is no longer external systems, but rather the intrinsic construction of thought itself. At this juncture, the true matter is no longer external systems or institutional frameworks. It's internal cognizance. The sole means to alter a predominant thought blueprint is through meta-thinking, the capacity to observe one's own thought as an entity instead of an identity. This entails distancing oneself from emotive responses and assessing them as information. Instead of pondering whether a choice seems appropriate or inappropriate, the inquiry shifts to why it evokes such sentiments. What suppositions are being triggered? What apprehensions are being activated? What antecedent encounters are molding the interpretation? Devoid of this stratum of awareness, every subsequent choice is channeled through the identical unseen framework. And nothing genuinely evolves. Meta-thinking is unsettling because it exposes the limited extent to which one's conduct is deliberately selected. It unveils that numerous inclinations are inherited instead of conceived. It compels an individual to confront the disparity between what they deem desirable and what their cognitive representation has trained them to pursue. The majority of individuals evade this degree of contemplation because it destabilizes identity. It necessitates conceding that current tactics may not be optimal and that prior determinations were made within a constricted scope. However, lacking this disturbance, genuine command is unattainable. The mind persists in operating on autopilot, even as the individual presumes they are navigating. Once this cognizance exists, the subsequent stride isn't motivation, but introduction. Thought blueprints don't evolve through affirmations or optimistic consideration. They evolve through iterative contact with alternative paradigms of reality. This entails intentionally scrutinizing individuals, systems, and histories that function outside accustomed frameworks. It entails observing how disparate career trajectories function, how affluence is genuinely created in nonlinear manners, and how triumphant individuals structure risk, learning, and leverage. The objective isn't to replicate specific results, but to internalize distinct decision rationales. This introduction functions by broadening the spectrum of what feels conceivable. When an individual solely perceives one type of life trajectory, that trajectory transforms into the norm. When they repetitively encounter varied models of triumph, the brain commences to loosen its emotive connection to the initial framework. Novel strategies no longer feel impractical. They commence to feel like legitimate alternatives. Over a period, this modifies emotive responses. Prospects that formerly felt perilous commence to feel intriguing. Perils that formerly felt irresponsible commence to feel requisite. A straightforward scenario exemplifies how minor alterations in thought can compound into substantial disparities. Envision someone who opts to prioritize skill accumulation over immediate revenue. In the near term, this selection may appear wasteful. It may entail diminished remuneration, amplified exertion, and reduced societal validation. However, over numerous years, the individual cultivates uncommon and transferable proficiencies. These skills augment bargaining strength, broaden career avenues, and engender prospects for ownership or autonomous work. The preliminary forfeiture compounds into structural advantage. Now envision someone who concentrates on optionality instead of solace. They elect roles that expose them to multifaceted domains rather than confining them to a singular narrow function. They sustain monetary adaptability, avert lifestyle escalation, and invest in learning. This establishes a safeguard against uncertainty. When industries fluctuate or technologies transform, they aren't ensnared. They can reorient because their identity isn't tethered to a solitary role. Over a decade, this pliability becomes more valuable than any particular credential or title. These shifts are subtle. They don't feel remarkable on a daily basis. However, their impacts accumulate imperceptibly. Each determination slightly alters the future determination array. The individual who prioritizes learning gains entry to more intricate quandaries. The individual who sustains optionality encounters more varied prospects. The individual who averts solace cultivates tolerance for ambiguity. Over a period, these slight disparities in thought yield entirely distinct life structures. The crucial point is that none of this necessitates extraordinary aptitude or provisions. It necessitates an alteration in internal rationale. The identical milieu can yield radically divergent results depending on how it's interpreted. The impediment isn't external prospect. It's the cognitive framework through which prospect is discerned. Altering that framework isn't about willpower. Willpower is a short-lived force. It dissipates under emotive strain. Genuine alteration stems from restructuring identity, setting, and feedback mechanisms. Identity dictates what feels innate. Setting dictates what is reinforced. Feedback mechanisms dictate what conduct is rewarded or penalized. If an individual persists in identifying as someone who esteems stability above all else, remains in settings that reward predictability, and receives feedback that reinforces conformity, their thought blueprint will remain intact regardless of motivation. To alter the blueprint, these constituents must shift in unison. Identity must broaden from fixed roles to versatile capabilities. Setting must encompass introduction to individuals and systems that function divergently. Feedback must reward protracted consideration rather than immediate solace. This clarifies why superficial modifications rarely achieve lasting effects. A person might test out fresh approaches but revert when stressed because the fundamental framework stays as it was. Within this context, the most significant kind of influence isn't money, technology, or connections. These are external instruments. Cognitive ability represents the deeper influence. It's the talent for consistently employing thought processes that lead to disproportionate results. This entails spotting trends before others do. It involves grasping second-order effects instead of merely responding to immediate urges. It involves establishing systems rather than improving isolated actions. An individual possessing robust cognitive influence doesn't require flawless information. They require precise conceptual models. They can function amidst ambiguity because their choices are steered by principles instead of impulses. They aren't reliant on particular results because their strategy holds up well across different scenarios. This form of influence grows exponentially over time because it affects every subsequent decision. Ultimately, mastering one's prevalent way of thinking represents the basic skill underpinning financial freedom, career durability, and individual agency. It dictates not just which decisions are made, but even which choices are apparent. It determines the emotional limits of possibility. Two individuals can inhabit the same economic landscape, access the same data, and encounter the same dangers, yet experience vastly different realities because their mental frameworks interpret those inputs in unique ways. The ultimate inference is straightforward yet unsettling. The majority of individuals face limitations not because of external factors. They are limited by the unseen structure of their own thought processes. Until that structure is examined, questioned, and reshaped, all strategies function within pre-existing limitations. Genuine control commences not by transforming circumstances, but by altering the viewpoint through which those circumstances are perceived. That viewpoint quietly directs the overall course of a life, regardless of whether one is conscious of it. If there's one concept worth retaining from all we've explored, it's this. Most individuals dedicate their entire lives attempting to change outcomes without ever altering the system generating those outcomes. They prioritize earning more, working harder, learning faster, or remaining driven, yet the genuine determinant was never effort. It was the mental framework influencing every decision in the background. Upon becoming conscious of that framework, recognition is unavoidable. You begin observing the frequency of your automatic reactions, inherited anxieties, and choices limited by assumptions never knowingly chosen. At that juncture, progress transitions from external strategies to internal architecture. This is additionally where responsibility becomes burdensome, because once you recognize that your thought pattern molds your entire existence, it becomes more challenging to fault systems, individuals, or situations, not because those elements are inconsequential, but because they are interpreted through a mind that perceives them in particular manners. Two individuals can confront identical realities and forge entirely dissimilar futures, purely because they perceive distinct possibilities within the same setting. From this moment onward, every significant decision turns into a diagnostic instrument. You can assess whether you're prioritizing comfort or influence, whether you're choosing based on apprehension or long-range structure, whether you're reacting to what appears secure or designing what cultivates liberation. These inquiries hold more significance than any individual tactic or financial guideline, and that clarifies why the foremost peril in contemporary existence isn't a deficit of funds, abilities, or chances. It's inhabiting a mental operating system never knowingly installed, because regardless of the system's nature, it will silently govern your entire future. If this viewpoint has reshaped your perspective on your own decisions, then stay connected with this channel. Every video presented here revolves around a solitary concept: understanding the underlying systems, enabling the redirection of efforts from alleviating symptoms to revamping root causes.